The morning of March 15, 2026 began like any other at Buckingham Palace. The sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens while staff members hurried through marble corridors, preparing for another day of royal duties. But, inside the oak-paneled walls of the king's private study, something unprecedented was about to unfold. King Charles III sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing a stack of documents that would reshape the very foundation of royal security protocols. The papers before him represented months of careful consideration, heated debates with advisors, and sleepless nights wrestling with a decision that would affect his entire family. At 77 years old, the king had witnessed decades of royal scandals, security breaches, and public relations disasters. Now, he was determined to prevent any future incidents that could damage the monarchy's reputation. The catalyst for this monumental decision had been building for years. Recent incidents involving younger royals had created headlines that made palace officials cringe. Prince Harry's continued media appearances, despite stepping back from royal duties, had created confusion about official royal representation. Princess Anne's granddaughter had been photographed at parties that raised eyebrows among conservative royal watchers. Even Prince William's children, though still young, were beginning to attract paparazzi attention that concerned security experts. But, the final straw had come just weeks earlier. During a routine public engagement, a member of the extended royal family had deviated from established security protocols to take selfies with fans. The seemingly innocent gesture had created a security nightmare, with crowds pushing forward and barriers nearly being breached. Royal protection officers had struggled to maintain control, and the incident had been captured by dozens of cameras, creating viral social media content that highlighted potential vulnerabilities in royal security. Charles had called an emergency meeting with Sir Clive Alderton, his private secretary, and Colonel Michael Stevens, the keeper of the Privy Purse. The three men had spent hours analyzing every aspect of royal protocol, from public appearances to private family gatherings. They examined security footage from recent events, reviewed incident reports, and studied how other European monarchies handled similar challenges. The king's military background had taught him the importance of clear command structures and unwavering discipline. During his time in the Royal Navy, he had learned that in critical situations, emotions must never override established procedures. Lives could depend on split-second decisions made according to training and protocol, not personal feelings or family relationships. As he reviewed the final draft of his new directives, Charles reflected on the weight of his decision. These weren't just administrative changes, they were fundamental shifts that would affect how his family lived their daily lives. The new protocols would create clear boundaries between personal relationships and professional duties, between being a grandfather and being a king. The document before him outlined strict hierarchies for public appearances. Working royals would be given priority in all official events, with their security needs taking precedence over family members who had stepped back from royal duties. Private family gatherings would be subject to enhanced security screening, with guest lists requiring approval from the Royal Protection Command. Even casual interactions between family members at public events would be governed by new guidelines designed to prevent security lapses. Perhaps most significantly, the new protocols established a clear chain of command during any security incident. Royal protection officers would have absolute authority to override family preferences if safety concerns arose. No longer would personal relationships or family dynamics be allowed to interfere with security decisions. The king's order was explicit: protocol must always come first, family considerations second. The decision hadn't been made lightly. Charles had consulted with security experts from around the world, studying how other high-profile families managed similar challenges. He had reviewed case studies of security breaches involving political leaders, celebrities, and other royal families. The conclusion was always the same: emotional decisions during critical moments led to vulnerabilities that could be exploited by those with harmful intentions. The king's study was filled with leather-bound books chronicling centuries of royal history. On the shelves sat volumes documenting the triumphs and tragedies of his predecessors, from Queen Victoria's long reign to his mother's remarkable 70-year tenure on the throne. Each monarch had faced unique challenges, but none had navigated the modern media landscape with its instant global communication and relentless scrutiny. Charles understood that his reign would be defined not just by ceremonial duties and charitable work, but by how effectively he protected the institution of monarchy itself. The royal family's approval ratings had fluctuated dramatically over recent decades, influenced by everything from personal scandals to public relations missteps. Every decision made by any family member could potentially impact public perception of the entire monarchy. The new protocols addressed these concerns systematically. They established clear guidelines for media interactions, specifying which family members could speak on behalf of the royal family and under what circumstances. They created standardized procedures for handling unexpected situations during public events. Most importantly, they removed ambiguity from security decisions by establishing non-negotiable priorities. As morning light streamed through the tall windows of his study, Charles signed each page of the directive with careful precision. His signature on these documents would set in motion a series of changes that would ripple through every aspect of royal life. Palace staff would need retraining. Security protocols would require updating. Family members would need briefings on their new roles and responsibilities. The king knew that some family members would struggle with these changes. The protocols would affect spontaneous interactions with the public, limit certain types of personal expression, and create new barriers between royal and non-royal family members. Grandchildren might find it harder to approach him casually at public events. Adult children who had stepped back from royal duties would face new restrictions when attending family gatherings. But Charles also understood that modern monarchy required modern solutions. The threats facing royal families in 2026 were unlike anything previous generations had encountered. Social media could amplify minor incidents into major crises within hours. International travel exposed royals to security risks in multiple countries. The global nature of modern media meant that local incidents could become international headlines instantly. The protocols also addressed digital security, an area that previous generations of royals never had to consider. Guidelines were established for social media use, electronic communications, and digital privacy. Family members would receive regular briefings on cybersecurity threats and best practices for protecting sensitive information. Charles had insisted that the protocols include regular review mechanisms. The royal family's security needs would continue evolving, and the protocols needed to adapt accordingly. Annual assessments would evaluate the effectiveness of the new procedures and identify areas for improvement. Input would be gathered from security professionals, family members, and palace staff to ensure the protocols remained practical and effective. The document also established clear consequences for protocol violations. While the king preferred to handle family matters privately, the protocol specified that security breaches could result in temporary restrictions on official duties or public appearances. Repeated violations could lead to more significant consequences, including loss of certain royal privileges or titles. As he finished reviewing the final pages, Charles thought about the public announcement that would need to be made. The protocols couldn't be implemented secretly, too many people would be affected, and transparency was essential for maintaining public trust. But the announcement would need to be carefully crafted to explain the reasoning behind the changes without revealing specific security details. The king's decision represented a fundamental shift in how the royal family balanced personal relationships with institutional responsibilities. For centuries, royal families had struggled with this tension, often with tragic consequences. Charles was determined that his reign would not be remembered for security failures that could have been prevented through better planning and clearer protocols. The morning sun had risen higher, casting new shadows across the palace grounds. Staff members continued their daily routines, unaware that their king had just signed documents that would transform how the royal family operated. Within hours, these protocols would begin reshaping centuries-old traditions, prioritizing institutional security over personal preferences in ways that previous monarchs might never have imagined. Charles closed the leather portfolio containing the signed protocols and pressed the button that would summon his private secretary. The implementation phase was about to begin, and there would be no turning back. The die had been cast, and the British monarchy was about to enter a new era defined by unprecedented discipline and unwavering adherence to security protocols. Within 30 minutes of King Charles signing the revolutionary protocols, an urgent meeting was called in the palace's most secure conference room. The mahogany-paneled chamber, known as the Windsor Room, had witnessed countless historic discussions over the decades. Today, it would host a gathering that would fundamentally alter how the royal family conducted their lives. Sir Clive Alderton arrived first, carrying a leather briefcase containing copies of the signed protocols. His usually composed demeanor showed signs of the gravity he understood this moment held. As private secretary to the king, he had been intimately involved in crafting these new rules, but he also knew the challenges that lay ahead in implementing them. The royal family was not just any family, they were individuals with strong personalities, decades of established habits, and varying levels of commitment to traditional royal duties. Colonel Michael Stevens entered next, his military bearing evident in every step. As keeper of the privy purse, he understood better than most how these protocol changes would affect the monarchy's financial and operational structures. The new security measures would require significant budget allocations, staff retraining, and infrastructure modifications. But, more than the practical challenges, he recognized the psychological impact these changes would have on family dynamics that had been decades in the making. The King's Equerry, Major Johnny Thompson, joined them, followed by the Deputy Private Secretary and the Director of Royal Communications. Each person in the room had been carefully selected for their expertise and discretion. They were the inner circle who would be responsible for translating the King's vision into practical reality across every aspect of royal operations. Sir Clive opened the meeting by distributing copies of the signed protocols. The documents were marked confidential, eyes only, and numbered to ensure accountability. As each person reviewed the contents, the room fell silent except for the turning of pages and occasional sharp intakes of breath as the full scope of the changes became apparent. The protocols were comprehensive in a way that few had anticipated. They covered everything from spontaneous public interactions to private family conversations that might be overheard by staff members. Security classifications were established for different types of information, with clear guidelines about what could be shared with whom under various circumstances. Even casual remarks at private dinners would be subject to new confidentiality requirements. One of the most striking aspects of the new protocols was their treatment of family hierarchy during public events. The traditional approach had been relatively informal, with family members interacting naturally while security maintained a discreet presence. Now, clear precedence orders were established, with working royals receiving priority consideration in all security decisions. Non-working royals, including those who had stepped back from official duties, would be subject to different security protocols that reflected their changed status. The communications director raised the first major concern. How would these changes be explained to the public without creating the impression of family discord? The protocols were clearly designed to address specific incidents and ongoing concerns, but presenting them as routine administrative updates would be challenging. The media would inevitably speculate about underlying tensions and conflicts that prompted such dramatic changes. Colonel Stevens addressed the logistical challenges. The new protocols would require extensive retraining for palace staff, royal protection officers, and event coordinators. Security sweeps would need to be more thorough, guest lists would require additional vetting, and contingency plans would need updating for hundreds of different scenarios. The financial implications were substantial, but the king had made clear that cost was not to be a limiting factor in ensuring family safety. Major Thompson focused on the protocol's impact on daily operations. The king's calendar would need restructuring to accommodate new security briefings and approval processes. Family gatherings that had previously been arranged with minimal formality would now require advance planning and security assessments. Even seemingly simple activities like grandchildren visiting the palace would be subject to new procedures. The Deputy Private Secretary raised concerns about compliance and enforcement. How would the palace handle situations where family members disagreed with security decisions? The protocols gave clear authority to security professionals, but family relationships were complex, and emotional reactions were inevitable. The document specified consequences for protocol violations, but implementing those consequences with beloved family members would test everyone's resolve. Sir Clive outlined the immediate implementation timeline. Key staff members would be briefed within 48 hours. Working royals would receive detailed explanations of their new responsibilities within a week. The broader royal family would be informed through carefully crafted communications that emphasized security concerns while minimizing the appearance of punitive measures. The protocols established a new decision-making hierarchy that would fundamentally change how royal events were planned and executed. Previously, personal preferences and family dynamics had played significant roles in determining arrangements. Now, security assessments would take precedence, with personal considerations becoming secondary factors in most situations. One of the most sensitive aspects of the new protocols involved children and grandchildren. The king's grandchildren had grown accustomed to relatively informal interactions with their grandfather during public events. They could approach him spontaneously, engage in casual conversations, and participate in impromptu photo opportunities. The new protocols would restrict these interactions, requiring advance approval and security clearance for any public engagement involving the youngest family members. The communications strategy became a central focus of the meeting. The palace needed to present these changes as proactive security enhancements rather than reactive measures prompted by specific incidents. The messaging would emphasize the king's commitment to protecting his family and ensuring the long-term stability of the monarchy. References to recent security challenges would be carefully worded to avoid creating additional controversy. Training programs would need development for different audiences. Senior royals would receive comprehensive briefings on the strategic reasoning behind the protocols. Working royals would focus on practical implementation during public engagements. Staff members would learn new procedures for handling various scenarios. Even palace security guards would need updates on their expanded authority and responsibilities. The protocols also addressed technology use within the royal family. Social media guidelines were established, specifying what types of content could be shared by different family members. Electronic communications would be subject to new security requirements, with certain types of sensitive information restricted to secure channels only. Personal devices would require regular security updates and monitoring. International implications were another consideration. The protocols would affect how the royal family interacted with foreign dignitaries, participated in overseas events, and managed security during international travel. Coordination with foreign security services would need enhancement, and diplomatic protocols would require updating to reflect the new procedures. The meeting participants discussed contingency planning for various scenarios. What would happen if a family member publicly objected to the new protocols? How would security handle situations where protocol requirements conflicted with diplomatic considerations? What procedures would govern emergency situations where immediate decisions were required? Staff confidentiality agreements would need strengthening to ensure that details of the new protocols remain secure. The royal household employed hundreds of people, and maintaining operational security would require unprecedented coordination and discipline. Background checks for new staff members would be enhanced, and existing employees would undergo additional security training. The protocols established regular review mechanisms to ensure continued effectiveness. Monthly assessment meetings would evaluate implementation progress and identify areas needing adjustment. Quarterly reports would analyze security incident trends and protocol compliance rates. Annual comprehensive reviews would assess the overall effectiveness of the new approach and recommend modifications as needed. Financial planning for the enhanced security measures began immediately. Budget allocations would need approval for additional security personnel, upgraded communication systems, enhanced surveillance equipment, and expanded training programs. The king had made clear that financial consideration should not compromise security effectiveness, but responsible stewardship of public funds remained important. As the meeting concluded, each participant received specific assignments for the implementation phase. Sir Clive would coordinate with senior royals to schedule briefing sessions. Colonel Stevens would oversee financial planning and resource allocation. Major Thompson would manage calendar adjustments and logistical requirements. The communications team would develop public messaging strategies. The transformation of royal operations had officially begun. Within days, centuries-old traditions would give way to modern security requirements. The royal family was about to discover that their new king's military background had taught him lessons about discipline and protocol that would reshape their lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. The Windsor room emptied as participants departed to begin their assigned tasks. The mahogany table remained, bearing only the indentations left by note-taking and the lingering weight of decisions that would echo through British royal history. The monarchy was evolving, and there would be no returning to the informal arrangements of previous generations. The call came at precisely 2:47 p.m. on a grey Tuesday afternoon. Prince William's voice carried a tension that palace staff had rarely heard from the normally composed heir to the throne. He was requesting an immediate private audience with his father, and the urgency in his tone made it clear this was not a routine family conversation. Within an hour, the Prince of Wales was walking through the private corridors of Buckingham Palace, his usual confident stride replaced by the measured steps of someone preparing for a difficult confrontation. The king received his son in the same oak-paneled study where he had signed the revolutionary protocols just days earlier. The afternoon light filtering through tall windows cast long shadows across the Persian carpet, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a courtroom than a family meeting room. Charles sat behind his desk, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed briefing papers. He looked up as William entered, noting immediately the tension in his son's shoulders and the tight set of his jaw. William had received his copy of the new protocols that morning during what was supposed to be a routine security briefing. As he read through the comprehensive document, the full implications of his father's decisions had become starkly apparent. These weren't minor administrative adjustments, they represented a fundamental restructuring of how the royal family would function, with implications that extended far beyond security considerations into the very heart of family relationships. The conversation began with carefully polite formalities, both men aware that they were treading on delicate ground. William expressed his understanding of the security concerns that had prompted the protocols, acknowledging the challenges facing the modern monarchy. But, as the discussion progressed, his deeper concerns began emerging. The new procedures would significantly impact his children's relationship with their grandfather, creating barriers that hadn't existed before. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis had grown up with relatively informal access to their grandfather during family gatherings and public events. They could approach him spontaneously, share quiet moments during ceremonial occasions, and enjoy the kind of natural interactions that most grandchildren take for granted. The new protocols would change all of that, requiring advance approval for casual interactions and subjecting even private family moments to security oversight. William's concerns went beyond the immediate impact on his children. He worried about the precedent being set and the long-term implications for royal family dynamics. The protocols seemed to prioritize institutional considerations over personal relationships in ways that could fundamentally alter the monarchy's human connections. How could they maintain public support if the royal family appeared increasingly distant and formal, even with each other? The king listened carefully to his son's concerns, his expression remaining neutral but his fingers drumming quietly on the desk's leather surface. He had anticipated this conversation and had prepared his responses, but hearing the emotional weight in William's voice made the discussion more challenging than he had expected. Charles understood his son's perspective, but he also carried the burden of knowledge about security threats that William wasn't fully aware of. Recent intelligence reports had painted a concerning picture of evolving threats to the royal family. Social media had enabled new forms of harassment and stalking behavior. International travel exposed family members to security risks in countries with varying levels of protection capability. The global nature of modern media meant that minor security lapses could be amplified into major incidents within hours. The protocols weren't just about preventing physical harm, they were about protecting the monarchy's reputation and long-term viability. Charles explained his reasoning carefully, sharing some details about recent security assessments while maintaining confidentiality about specific threats. He described how security professionals had analyzed various scenarios and concluded that existing procedures were insufficient for current realities. The protocols represented months of expert analysis and careful consideration of alternatives. They weren't punitive measures directed at any individual, they were comprehensive updates needed to address modern challenges. But William pressed further, questioning whether the protocols might create more problems than they solved. Would the public accept a royal family that appeared increasingly isolated behind layers of security procedures? Could they maintain their connection with ordinary citizens while adhering to such rigid protocols? The monarchy's strength had always come partly from appearing accessible and relatable, despite their extraordinary circumstances. The conversation grew more heated as both men struggled with competing priorities. William felt that his father was prioritizing institutional concerns over family relationships, potentially damaging the very connections that made the monarchy relevant to modern Britain. Charles felt that his son was underestimating the seriousness of current security challenges and the potential consequences of maintaining inadequate protection measures. Other family concerns emerged during their discussion. How would Princess Anne react to new restrictions on her grandchildren's interactions with the king? What about Prince Edward's family, who had always maintained relatively low profiles but now faced enhanced security requirements? Even extended family members who attended occasional royal events would be subject to new vetting and approval processes. The protocol's impact on public events became another point of contention. Royal walkabouts, where family members mingled informally with crowds, had been popular public relations successes. The new procedures would make such spontaneous interactions much more difficult, potentially creating a more formal and distant relationship between royals and the public. William questioned whether the security benefits justified the potential public relations costs. Charles acknowledged these concerns but maintained his position that security considerations must take precedence. He had witnessed firsthand how quickly situations could deteriorate when proper protocols weren't followed. His years of military service had taught him that discipline and adherence to established procedures could mean the difference between safety and disaster. Personal preferences, no matter how well-intentioned, could not be allowed to override security requirements. The discussion extended to specific scenarios that illustrated the protocol's practical implications. If the king's grandchildren attended a public event, they would need advanced security clearance to approach him. If family members wanted to deviate from planned routes during public engagements, security approval would be required. Even casual conversations at private family gatherings would be subject to new confidentiality requirements. William raised concerns about the psychological impact on the children. They had grown up understanding their unique position in British society, but they had also enjoyed relatively normal family relationships within that context. The new protocols could create an environment where even family interactions felt formal and constrained. How would that affect their development and their future relationship with royal responsibilities? The king's response reflected his own struggles with these competing priorities. He didn't want to create barriers between himself and his grandchildren, but he had concluded that some restrictions were necessary to ensure their long-term safety and the monarchy's stability. The protocols included provisions for private family time that would be less constrained, but public interactions would need to follow new procedures. As the afternoon wore on, both men began searching for compromises that could address their mutual concerns. William suggested a phased implementation that would allow time to assess the protocol's effectiveness and adjust problematic elements. Charles proposed enhanced training programs that would help family members understand and adapt to the new requirements while minimizing their emotional impact. The conversation also revealed deeper philosophical differences about the monarchy's role in modern Britain. William favored maintaining stronger connections with the public, even if that required accepting some security risks. Charles prioritized institutional stability and long-term survival, even if that required accepting some public relations challenges. Both perspectives had merit, but they pointed toward different approaches for navigating modern royal responsibilities. Practical concerns about implementation emerged as they discussed specific details. Who would be responsible for explaining the changes to the grandchildren? How would security briefings be conducted without creating anxiety or fear? What procedures would govern family emergencies where immediate decisions were required? The protocols provided frameworks for these situations, but the human dimensions required careful consideration. The meeting concluded without complete resolution, but with increased understanding on both sides. William accepted that his father's concerns about security were genuine and based on expert analysis. Charles acknowledged that the protocol's implementation would need to account for family relationships and public perceptions. They agreed to continue discussions as the implementation phase progressed, with provisions for adjustments based on practical experience. As William prepared to leave, both men recognized that their relationship had evolved in subtle but significant ways. The conversation had highlighted the tensions between Charles's role as king and his role as father and grandfather. Future discussions would need to balance institutional requirements with family relationships in ways that honored both priorities. The study fell silent after William's departure, leaving Charles alone with his thoughts and the weight of decisions that were reshaping his family's lives. The protocols remained necessary, but their human costs were becoming increasingly apparent. The challenge would be maintaining family unity while adapting to security requirements that none of them had anticipated when Charles ascended to the throne. The state dinner for the President of France was to be King Charles's first major public event since implementing the new protocols. The evening of March 28, 2026, would serve as a crucial test of whether the revolutionary security procedures could be implemented without compromising the elegance and diplomacy that such occasions demanded. Palace staff had spent weeks preparing for this moment, knowing that every detail would be scrutinized both for security effectiveness and diplomatic success. The guest list had undergone unprecedented vetting. Each of the 150 invited guests had been subject to enhanced background checks, with security clearances required even for long-standing diplomatic contacts. The French delegation had initially expressed surprise at the additional security requirements, but diplomatic channels had smoothly explained the measures as routine updates to reflect modern security realities. Behind the scenes, however, the process had required delicate negotiations to avoid suggesting any lack of trust in France's own security procedures. Princess Anne arrived at Buckingham Palace 2 hours before the event, her usual punctuality now carrying additional significance under the new protocols. As a working royal, she held priority status in security arrangements, but she had also been vocal about her concerns regarding the changes during private family discussions. Her interactions this evening would be closely watched by palace staff as an indicator of how senior royals were adapting to the new requirements. The princess's security briefing took place in a small anteroom adjacent to the state dining room. Colonel Stevens personally conducted the session, outlining the evening's specific protocols while emphasizing the flexibility built into the system for diplomatic necessities. Anne listened carefully, her expression revealing little about her thoughts, but her questions were pointed and practical. How would spontaneous conversations with guests be handled? What procedures would govern unexpected diplomatic opportunities? Could she deviate from planned routes if circumstances required? Prince William and Catherine arrived shortly after, accompanied by their enhanced security detail. The protocols required that working royals travel with additional protection officers, a change that had initially felt excessive but was beginning to feel routine after several weeks of implementation. Their children remained at home under the new guidelines that restricted young royals' attendance at evening state functions unless specifically required for diplomatic purposes. The transformation of palace security was immediately apparent to anyone familiar with previous arrangements. Additional uniformed officers were stationed throughout the building, while plainclothes security personnel mingled with the catering staff and service teams. Communication systems had been upgraded with encrypted channels, and backup procedures were in place for various emergency scenarios. The changes were significant enough that even experienced palace staff needed time to adjust to the new environment. King Charles made his final preparations in the private apartments, assisted by his valet and overseen by Major Thompson. The evening would test not just the security protocols but also the king's ability to maintain his natural diplomatic style while adhering to new constraints. His interactions with guests would need to appear spontaneous and warm while following carefully planned security procedures. The challenge was maintaining authenticity while operating within significantly more structured parameters. The French President and First Lady arrived precisely on schedule, their motorcade having followed routes cleared and secured according to the enhanced protocols. The greeting ceremony proceeded flawlessly, with security arrangements invisible to guests but comprehensive in scope. Diplomatic observers noted no apparent changes in the warmth of the welcome, suggesting that the new procedures could indeed be implemented without compromising international relationships. But the first real test came during the pre-dinner reception in the picture gallery. The protocols required that all guest interactions with the king follow predetermined patterns, with security personnel maintaining specific positioning throughout the event. When the French foreign minister approached King Charles with an unexpected request for a private word about urgent bilateral issues, the new procedures faced their first significant challenge. Under previous arrangements, such impromptu diplomatic conversations were routine. Palace staff would simply create space for private discussions while maintaining discreet security presence. The new protocols, however, required advance approval for any deviation from planned interactions. The foreign minister's request triggered a rapid consultation between security personnel and diplomatic staff, with decisions needed within moments to avoid creating awkward delays. The resolution came through carefully rehearsed contingency procedures. Major Thompson approached the king with a subtle signal, indicating that the requested private conversation could proceed under enhanced security monitoring. Additional protection officers discreetly repositioned themselves while maintaining the appearance of normal social circulation. The conversation proceeded naturally, but every word was monitored and recorded according to the new security requirements. Princess Anne faced her own protocol challenge when she encountered an old friend among the French delegation whom she hadn't expected to see. Their reunion was warm and spontaneous, but it also deviated from the planned guest interaction schedule. Security personnel had to quickly assess whether the unscheduled conversation posed any risks while allowing the personal moment to proceed naturally. The incident highlighted the ongoing tension between human relationships and security requirements. The state dinner itself proceeded magnificently, with guests praising both the cuisine and the ambience. But, behind the scenes, the new protocols were being tested in dozens of small ways. Service staff followed enhanced procedures for approaching the king and other senior royals. Guest movements were monitored more closely than in previous events. Even routine activities like photographing the proceedings required additional security oversight. One significant moment occurred when the French president proposed an impromptu toast that wasn't included in the evening's scheduled program. Such spontaneous diplomatic gestures were traditionally welcomed as signs of genuine warmth between nations. Under the new protocols, however, unscheduled speeches required security assessment for potential risks. The brief delay while procedures were followed was barely noticeable to most guests, but it illustrated how comprehensively the new requirements affected even ceremonial activities. The evening's musical entertainment presented another test of the protocol's flexibility. The scheduled performance by a renowned string quartet proceeded as planned, but when the French First Lady requested a specific piece that wasn't on the program, the change required security approval. The musicians needed clearance to deviate from their pre-approved repertoire, and the extended performance time required adjustments to security shift schedules. Prince William's interactions with guests provided insight into how younger royals were adapting to the changes. His conversations appeared natural and engaging, but observers familiar with previous events might have noticed slightly more formal positioning and less spontaneous movement throughout the room. The prince had clearly been briefed thoroughly and was following the new procedures carefully, though his diplomatic effectiveness remained undiminished. A minor crisis emerged when a guest experienced a medical emergency during dinner. The incident required immediate medical attention, but the new protocols also mandated specific security procedures whenever unexpected situations arose. Medical personnel had to coordinate with security officers while responding to the health emergency. The patient received excellent care and recovered quickly, but the incident demonstrated how the enhanced protocols affected even humanitarian responses. The evening's success was measured not just by diplomatic objectives achieved but also by security procedures followed without compromising the event's effectiveness. Post-event analysis revealed several areas where the protocols had functioned smoothly and a few situations where adjustments might be beneficial. The feedback would be invaluable for refining procedures before future major events. King Charles's performance throughout the evening was masterful, demonstrating his ability to maintain warmth and diplomatic effectiveness while adhering to enhanced security requirements. His years of experience in royal duties served him well in adapting to the new constraints without compromising his natural interpersonal skills. Guests left with positive impressions of both the evening's hospitality and the strength of Anglo-French relations. The French delegation's security team provided their own assessment of the enhanced protocols, noting the professionalism and thoroughness of the arrangements while confirming that diplomatic objectives had been fully achieved. Their feedback would be shared with other international partners to ensure continued cooperation with the upgraded security requirements. As the evening concluded and guests departed, palace staff began their post-event analysis. Security footage would be reviewed, incident reports would be compiled, and feedback would be gathered from all participants. The protocols had passed their first major test, but continuous improvement would be necessary as they faced different types of events and varying security challenges. The state dinner had proven that the new protocols could be implemented successfully without compromising diplomatic effectiveness or royal hospitality. But it had also revealed the complexity of balancing security requirements with the human elements that made royal events meaningful and effective. The challenge moving forward would be maintaining this balance while adapting to different types of events and evolving security needs. The king retired to his private apartments knowing that the evening had been a success on multiple levels. The protocols had worked, relationships had been strengthened, and the monarchy had demonstrated its ability to adapt to modern security realities while maintaining its traditional roles. But he also understood that this was just the beginning of a long process of adjustment and refinement that would continue throughout his reign. 3 months after implementing the revolutionary protocols, King Charles III faced the most challenging test yet of his protocol first, family second directive. The occasion was Princess Charlotte's 10th birthday celebration, an event that would traditionally blend intimate family moments with ceremonial duties. But, on this bright June morning at Windsor Castle, every aspect of the celebration would be governed by the security procedures that had transformed royal life in ways the family was still learning to navigate. The day began with an unusual sight in the castle's private quarters. Princess Charlotte, dressed in a pale blue dress chosen specifically for its suitability in photographs, sat patiently while security personnel conducted their morning briefing. At just 10 years old, she was learning to accept that spontaneous interactions with her grandfather now required advanced planning and security clearance. The child who had once run freely through palace corridors now moved within carefully managed boundaries designed to protect both her safety and the monarchy's reputation. Prince William watched his daughter's birthday preparations with mixed emotions. The protocols had been in effect long enough for the family to adapt to their practical requirements, but the emotional adjustments remained challenging. Charlotte's natural exuberance had always been one of her most charming qualities, but the new security procedures required her to channel that energy within predetermined limits. The balance between protection and normal childhood experiences remained delicate and sometimes heartbreaking to observe. The morning's first major challenge came when Charlotte asked if she could personally invite her grandfather to see the special art project she had created for him. Under the previous informal arrangements, such a request would have been granted immediately. Now, it required security assessment, schedule coordination, and approval from multiple palace departments. The delay was brief, but for a 10-year-old eager to share her creativity, even a few minutes felt like an eternity. Queen Camilla arrived at Windsor Castle with her own enhanced security detail, her presence adding another layer of complexity to the day's arrangements. The protocols required that all family movements be coordinated through Central Security Command, transforming what had once been casual family gatherings into carefully orchestrated events. Her warm relationship with her step-granddaughter remained unchanged, but their interactions now unfolded within a framework of procedures that previous generations would have found unimaginable. The king's approach to the castle was itself a demonstration of how thoroughly the protocols had transformed royal routines. His motorcade followed routes that had been secured hours in advance, with backup plans prepared for various contingencies. What had once been a simple drive to see his granddaughter now involved coordination between multiple security agencies and real-time monitoring of potential threats. The grandfather's natural eagerness to celebrate Charlotte's birthday was necessarily filtered through layers of protection that sometimes felt overwhelming. The gift exchange ceremony illustrated both the strengths and limitations of the new security arrangements. Charlotte's presents had all been screened in advance, a process that was thorough but also stripped away some of the surprise and spontaneity that made such moments special. The king's gift to his granddaughter, a specially commissioned painting set, had undergone security review that included assessment of the paint's chemical composition and verification of the artist's background. When Charlotte proudly presented her grandfather with the artwork she had created, the moment was genuinely touching despite the formal framework surrounding it. The painting depicted Windsor Castle surrounded by gardens filled with flowers and the royal colors, a child's vision of her grandfather's home rendered with careful attention to details she had observed during many visits. The king's emotional response was authentic and heartfelt, proving that meaningful family connections could survive even within enhanced security protocols. The afternoon's scheduled walk through the castle gardens became a complex security operation involving multiple teams of protection officers, advanced route reconnaissance, and constant communication monitoring. What appeared to observers as a leisurely family stroll was actually a carefully choreographed event with security personnel positioned throughout the grounds and contingency plans prepared for various scenarios. Charlotte walked hand in hand with her grandfather, both of them maintaining natural conversation while security teams ensured their safety through invisible but comprehensive protection. The tension between security requirements and family authenticity became most apparent during the traditional birthday photographs. The castle's state apartments provided a magnificent backdrop, but they also presented security challenges that required careful management. Each room had been swept multiple times, photographers had undergone enhanced background checks, and even the positioning of furniture had been assessed for potential security implications. The resulting photographs were beautiful and dignified, but they had required significantly more planning and coordination than similar sessions in previous years. A particularly poignant moment came when Charlotte asked why there were so many serious-looking people watching them during what was supposed to be a family celebration. King Charles knelt to his granddaughter's level and explained gently that the helpers were there to make sure everyone stayed safe so they could enjoy their special time together. His explanation was age-appropriate and reassuring, but it also highlighted the reality that even young royals could no longer be shielded completely from the security requirements that governed their lives. The afternoon tea celebration in the castle's oak room demonstrated how the protocols had affected even intimate family traditions. The guest list had been carefully vetted, seating arrangements had been assessed for security implications, and even the menu had been subject to additional scrutiny. Despite these constraints, the gathering retained its warmth and family atmosphere. Charlotte's laughter filled the room as she shared stories about her school activities and upcoming summer plans, proving that genuine family connections could thrive within the new security framework. But the day's most significant test came when an unexpected security alert briefly disrupted the celebrations. A suspicious vehicle had been spotted near the castle grounds, triggering protocols that required immediate assessment and potential evacuation procedures. The alert lasted only 20 minutes and proved to be a false alarm involving a delivery driver who had taken a wrong turn. But the incident demonstrated both the comprehensiveness of the new security measures and their potential for disrupting family moments that were meant to be joyful and relaxed. Charlotte's response to the security interruption revealed how well she had adapted to her new reality. Rather than becoming frightened or upset, she calmly followed the instructions given by security personnel and helped reassure younger cousins who were also present. Her mature response suggested that the protocols, while constraining in some ways, were also providing the royal children with confidence in their safety and security that previous generations might have lacked. The evening's private dinner offered the closest approximation to traditional family time, with immediate family members gathered in the castle's private dining room. But even this intimate setting was governed by the new protocols, with security personnel maintaining discreet monitoring and communication systems remaining active throughout the meal. The conversation was natural and loving, filled with birthday wishes and family news, but it unfolded within a security envelope that was now simply part of their new normal. As the day concluded, King Charles reflected on how successfully the protocols had protected his family while allowing them to maintain meaningful relationships and create happy memories. Charlotte's birthday had been celebrated with joy and love, despite the complex security arrangements that had made it possible. The child's happiness and the family's ability to connect authentically proved that the protocols, while demanding significant adjustments, were compatible with the human connections that made royal life meaningful. The evening's final moments provided perhaps the most telling assessment of the protocol's success. As Charlotte hugged her grandfather goodnight, their embrace was natural, warm, and unguarded despite the security procedures that had governed every other aspect of the day. In that spontaneous moment of family affection, the king found validation for the difficult decisions he had made 3 months earlier. The protocols were working, his family was safe, and the bonds between them remained strong. The birthday celebration had proven that the monarchy could adapt to modern security realities without sacrificing the human elements that connected them to each other and to the British people. The protocols would continue evolving as the family gained experience with their requirements, but this day had demonstrated their fundamental viability. King Charles had successfully balanced his roles as monarch, father, and grandfather, proving that protocol first, family second could still preserve what mattered most about both responsibilities. As Windsor Castle settled into evening quiet, the success of Charlotte's celebration provided a template for future royal events. The protocols had passed another crucial test, demonstrating their ability to protect the royal family while allowing them to fulfill their ceremonial duties and maintain their personal relationships. The monarchy had successfully entered a new era of security consciousness without losing its essential character or its connection to the British people who looked to them for continuity, dignity, and hope.